Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Have I got an echo? No. Well, good morning, everyone, to Development Standards. I think this is probably Alec and I's second
Close the blind, Angel.
one. I'm not in a clear reception.
Convener, could I just ask? Yeah, could I just ask anyone that has their microphone unmuted to mute that at the moment? I think it's just with the guests coming into the meeting, it's causing a bit of feedback. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll carry on then. Agenda item 1, any apologies?
No apologies, Convener.
Declarations of interest. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Councillor Fotheringham.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, agenda item number 7, report 34/22, the planning application for the field 300 metres west of Grange of Berryhill in Invergowrie. In the last week, I have had several emails from residents, but I have not responded to them nor made any comment, and I will remain in the meeting during consideration of this application. Thank you.
Any other declarations of interest?
Convener, Councillor Laurie is the next one.
Councillor Laurie, yes.
Yep, just on the same item, I've also had quite a bit of correspondence via email from my constituents. I've not engaged with that, and I will be taking part in the discussion and voting.
Yes. Councillor Brace, do I see your hand up?
Yes, you do. Thanks, Convener. It's not a declaration of interest. It was really to alert the officers that Councillor Durnow's trying desperately to get into the meeting, but and she's wondering if someone could let her in.
Okay, Sarah, can you help me there?
Convener, Councillor Durnow isn't shown as a guest, but I'll ask my colleague, Mrs. Maley, if she could maybe try and sort that out. Thank you.
Yes, okay.
She is a member.
Yes.
That can't get in through the link, apparently. Should
we be holding off then, Sarah?
Convener, there is an option for Councillor Durnow to call into the meeting. That should be the option in terms of the access if the link. However, as members will be aware, if we start the for the items, then Councillor Durnow wouldn't be able to take part in that item until she actually arrives in the meeting. We would have to deal with that particular item. But if you could just leave that with us, we will try and get Councillor Durnow in.
Okay, so should I hold off then?
I think, Convener, you can continue with
yes.
The items 3 and 4.
Yes.
Convener, Mr. Thompson has his hand up as well.
Yeah, Convener, it's just to say, beyond what Sarah's saying, I think to give Councillor Durnow some time to access it, whether by telephone, that we can do the items, but when we come to actual applications, I think we need to give it a few minutes to try and allow Councillor Durnow to come in, solely because if the presentation started, then she won't be able to participate in the decision or any decision made.
Okay, right. Thank you, David. Well, we'll move on then. We can go to agenda item 3, building warrants. The committee is asked to note that during the period the 4th of December 2021 to 20th of January 2022, a total of 141 building warrants and the 27 amendment to warrants have been approved with an estimated cost of £9,826,957. Is that noted? And agenda item 4, move on to delegated decisions. The committee is asked to note that during the period the 4th of December 2021 to the 20th of January 2022, a total of 91 planning applications have been approved and 1 refused under the scheme of delegation to officers. Is that for noted? That's for noting. We want agenda item 5, minutes of the previous meeting. Are those agreed? Everybody's shaking their head, yes. Okay.
Agreed.
Now we'll move on to agenda item 6. land at 500 metres west of Academy, Forfar Academy. This has been withdrawn. So we now move on to agenda item 7, which I think I will hold off to see if Councillor Durno can come in. This is quite a major application, and I think we should have everybody on board for this one.
Convener, it's Karen Maley here, committee officer. I've actually sent an email to Councillor Durno, sent her a request to join and asked her to call in, but I can't actually see any responses yet.
Convener, if all members are agreed, if you could just give us a few minutes to try and let Councillor Durno have access to the meeting.
Well, I think that's the committee would agree to that this is quite an important planning application that's coming before us.
Thank you.
Convener, you could go to the last item on the agenda and do that one, perhaps, because that's just an update on an external decision, and give Councillor Durno a bit more time. I've texted her to let her know that Karen's trying to contact her.
Convener, could I just ask a question about item 6, please?
Well, if it's been withdrawn and we've moved on, Councillor Moore.
Yeah, it was just a bit of confusion on it.
Well, it's been withdrawn, so
Okay.
we'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Convener, I think I've got the Councillor Durno, I think, is saying that she's switched off. They sent a link and it's not working, so she's switched off. So I would take it from that she's not going to be joining us.
Okay, right, thank you, Councillor Duff. Everyone, so I suggest that we just move on. Would I be correct in saying that, Sarah?
Convener, just as an alternative option, if I'm wondering if Councillor Duff may be able to provide Mrs. Maley with a mobile number. Could you email that? And Karen has said that she would put Councillor Duff on loudspeak. I mean, obviously, Councillor Durno has access to the officer presentation, and she would be able to hear the audio that goes with that. Councillor, you're on mute. Sorry, I wasn't hearing that.
Can you just repeat the instructions to me? What do you want me to do?
Could you email Karen Maley or send her a Teams message with a number for Councillor Durno, and Karen will put Councillor Durno on loudspeak so that she can actually hear the conversation and she can participate in the meeting that way?
Yeah, will do. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, right, we'll move on to agenda item 7. This deals with the planning application at 300 metres west of Grange of Berryhill in Invergowrie for a solar panel array taking up a large productive farm. So could we have the slides, Mr. Hunter?
Thank you very much, Convener. As you indicate, this is a planning application for a solar array on land at Grange of Berryhill near Invergowrie. Site extends from Grange of Berryhill across to Bin Farm and includes land to the south of Piper Dam. A location plan, we see the application site identified in red on the slide before you. Considerable extent of land, around about 120 hectares within the red line application site. Just in context, we have Piper Dam located to the north of the site. We have Fowles Village located to the east of the site. Blacklaw Hill located to the west, and again in terms of context, Hay Road located some distance, around about 3.5 kilometres to the south of the site. Just looking at this slide, you can see the green line identified that runs from the site to the A90, and this is identified as the access route for construction traffic. As I've indicated, maybe a distance round about 3.5 kilometres. The route runs predominantly through land that's within Perth and Kinross administrative area. The application indicates we're looking at an average of 19 vehicles accessing the site per day. Now that's over the 6-month construction period associated with the development. That reduces significantly once the development is constructed. Traffic movement associated with it would be relatively infrequent and relatively light. Now the route from the site to the A90 is predominantly single track in places. There are informal passing places, but there are areas of constraint roundabout Drawn Farm, Mill Hill, I think it is located midway between the sites. But colleagues at Perth and Kinross Council have indicated that they have no objection to the application, that they're satisfied that the route can accommodate the level and type of traffic that would be associated with the proposal, subject to condition 2C that's in the papers before you. That's requiring a traffic management plan. Similarly, officers at Transport Scotland have indicated that they've got no objection in relation to traffic impacts associated with the trunk road, and our own roads colleagues have indicated no objection to the proposal in relation to impact on traffic movements, road traffic safety within the Angus Council administrative area. So access taken from the A90, localised improvements to accommodate the development, and access taken from the south of Binns Farm into the development area, construction traffic moving through the confines of the application site itself. The proposal in more detail. This is the access point, again, just to give some context, and we have Piper Dam located to the north of the site. Red line site, as I've indicated, around about 120 hectares. The solar panels would accommodate slightly more than half of that, so around about 63 hectares, accommodating the solar panels that you see identified in blue. On again, just draw your attention to a few features. We see standoff areas around the perimeter of the site, in the proximity of some dwellings close to the site. We have a construction compound and we have a substation compound that would remain on site post-construction. Electricity line running north to south across the site with a standoff around about it. And we have a core path that runs from Bin in the south to Piper Dam at the north. So around about maybe 1 kilometre and dissecting the site that we see here. Now, some concern has been raised regarding impact on agricultural land, and just to confirm, soil classification maps indicate that an area at the eastern section of the site, maybe just in the area that we see here, is class 3.1 land, which would be prime land. Remainder of the site identified as 3.2. Now, the council's policies allow use of prime for renewable energy development. That's one of the exceptions where the council allows development on agricultural land. Draw members' attention to the decision at Ballachy, which was taken September 2020. Again, that involved development of a solar farm on prime quality land. That was approved by council in accordance with development plan policy. Notwithstanding that, the applicant has done site-specific soil analysis, and the indication from that is that none of the site constitutes prime quality land. Moving on to the development itself, the images in the centre of the screen that you see here give an indication of the arrangement of the solar panels sitting round about 600 millimetres above ground, tilted to the south, and a maximum of height at the rear of the panel in the region of 3 metres. Two scenarios shown here, one on relatively flat land where a distance of around about 3.5 metres is shown between the banks of panels, and on a south-facing field where there's a slope, a slightly greater separation distance between the panels. Top left-hand image shows some panels in context. There's reference to fencing, just to confirm that's typically deer-type fencing that would be enclosing the panels, as you see in the image here. Top right-hand side, we have a photograph which shows panels in situ at the Gynde, so just to the northwest of Arbroath. To give some context, this photograph is taken from the public road that runs to the south of the site, so at a distance of around about 0.5 kilometre. So that's the separation distance. You can see the properties round about the Gynde, and the rear of that on a gently south-facing slope. Within the site, we have the construction compound, and you can see a number of structures located within that. Those would typically be portable building type feature, similar to the structure that you see at the bottom right-hand side. Indication is these would be a maximum of 3 metres in height, so probably comparable to the structure you see at the bottom right of the image. In terms of the proposal itself, it has been amended to introduce some additional landscaping. You can see areas identified just on the screen in front of you, identified with the cursor. And these are landscape areas that would be provided to replicate historic field boundaries. So this is an old extract map, and it identifies the smaller field pattern that would have been characteristic of the area many years ago. And the proposal involves recreating some of those field patterns to break up the mass and extent of the solar development itself. And we have an indication of the planting that we propose. So it's hedgerows that would be allowed to grow to a significant height. Now, clearly, those are going to take some time to establish, some time to grow. So any mitigation that's provided would take some time to achieve. I've got two slides that don't appear related to you, but concern has been raised regarding the report before you and its accuracy in relation to landscape character classification. Now, paragraph 8.7 of the report indicates that the application site comprises igneous hills, landscape character type, and dip slope farmland character type. Now, this drawing, this plan, indicates the landscape character types. The pink tone that you see identifies the igneous hills. The green area that you see to the right-hand side of the screen identifies dip slope farmland. Now, I should be clear that the lines, the differentiation between the two has been plotted at a very large scale. So on-site differentiation could be different depending on site evaluation. But you can see from this drawing, the red line application site, the vast majority of the hills, a smaller area located to the east of the site comprises dip slope. Now, the council has produced strategic landscape guidance in relation to solar development, and it provides specific advice in relation to igneous hills type, and it provides guidance in relation to dip slope farmland character type. Now, both those types are described, and the policy or the is detailed at paragraph 8.7 of the report before you. The second image that's been added is an extract from the landscape guidance that's been produced. This is, and if we look at the bottom left of the screen, you can see this yellow area. Now, this represents the igneous hill character type, and the majority of the application site is within this area. Now, the council's guidance in relation to that area indicates that this could be a landscape solar development. So this is an area where at a strategic level, the council has identified that there is at least some potential for solar development within the igneous hills landscape character type. Officers' evaluation of the proposal is consistent with the applicant view. There is capacity to accommodate the development proposed within the landscape character type. The wider igneous hills landscape character type extends to the east in the area that we can see here. There are areas, the white areas on this plan, where there's considered to be no capacity for solar development. The yellow area that includes the application site identified as an area where there's potential for some solar development. Now, that's giving no commitment to the scale of the proposal. That has to be considered on a site-specific basis. A zone of theoretical visibility gives an impression of where the development is likely to be visible from. And you can see from the areas to the north and areas to the west, limited visibility. Areas where the development is likely to be visible from, shown in the blue tone in the image before you. So that's certainly in the immediate environment of the development. It extends across to areas of Fowles and A90. It will extend beyond that, and the development is likely to be visible in areas a considerable distance to the south of this development. Visibility in itself doesn't render the proposal unacceptable. What we're looking at is a judgment in the acceptability of that visibility. Just on this image, we can see a few viewpoints, and I'll pick those out if I can. We have Blacklaw Hill located to the west of the site. We have Drawn Hill located to the southwest. We have the A90 to the Fowles village to the east of the site. And if we look at each of those in turn, this is a view from Blacklaw Hill. So this is a photograph of the development site provided by the applicant. Again, I want to be clear, the photograph probably makes things look further away. So if you were standing at the top of Blacklaw Hill, some of the features in this image are going to look closer. The other thing it does is it tends to reduce the vertical emphasis. So the hills, Dundee Law that you see in the background here would look higher. It would look closer. So this is underplaying the scale of the landscape to some extent. Now, the lines that you see on the drawing indicate the approximate extents of the solar development, and the areas below that identify those areas that are likely to be visible. So the green field that we see in this area would accommodate solar panels. Similarly, the field behind the trees that we see here would accommodate solar panels, and some of that is going to be visible from the top of Blacklaw Hill. Areas that we see in here, the north-facing slopes remain free of development, but some of the development to the south would be visible, albeit potentially through some of the foliage of the trees that we see in this image. Construction compound itself located just maybe around about the centre of the image that we see here. So this photograph, maybe around about 500 metres, 400 to 500 metres distance from the closest part of the solar array. Moving on, this is from Drawn Hill. So this is located round about 1.5 kilometres to the southwest of the site. Again, you get an impression of the extent of the development, and you can see the area that's potentially visible. So the south-facing slopes on the frontage of the development, on the southernmost part of the development, likely to be visible from this viewpoint, albeit at a distance of around about 1.5 kilometres. The northern part of the site, more restricted visibility. So unlikely that from this area you will see the whole development at any particular point. It's the southern face of the southern part of the development that would be visible at this point. Moving round, this is from the A90, looking in a basically a northwesterly direction, a range of polytunnels, and maybe round about a distance of just over 3 kilometres, development occupying the slopes that you see, the south-facing slopes that you see in this area. So from this distance, it's occupying a relatively small part of the wider landscape, and that's considered acceptable in the context of the limited impact it would have on the wider landscape. But again, just to be clear, in reality, the site is going to look closer. Blacklaw Hill, which sits maybe just round about the point identified by the cursor, a little bit higher and closer than it does in this image. This is an image from Fowles Village, looking generally in a westerly direction. You can see electricity pylons that run through the site. It identifies the rough extent of the application site. And this is a photomontage, so perhaps you can make out areas where solar panels would actually be visible. They're identified just with the slightly darker tone in the areas that we see here. So some visibility in the areas that we see here, but the area on the northern slopes largely screened by virtue of existing landscaping. This image, round about 850 metres to the closest part of the solar development itself. And I would suggest from this view, the impacts are more limited. View from the north, this is from Piper Dam, from the loch area itself. This is the restaurant and associated buildings. Blacklaw Hill in this area, and a small section of panels potentially visible that we see identified with the cursor. I have to say, from the southern extents of Piper Dam, from the course, the development would be more visible, but this is from the footpath network in the vicinity of the loch itself. And just an image that shows the Piper Dam golf course. You can see the boundary of the golf course running in this area, and a standoff of around 80 metres between the golf course and the solar array itself. And you can get an impression of the landscaping that would be provided in conjunction with the development. Now, if we look at the application site, there are some properties, some areas that I think it's worth looking at a little bit more just to fully understand the nature of impacts. We have properties in the vicinity of Binns Farm to the south. We have North Bin located to the north of the site, and we have Grange of Berry Hill and properties at Berry Hill located just to the southeast of the site. This is a photomontage taken from this public road that runs to the south of the site, and you can see the extent of the panels on the south-facing slopes that we see here. You can perhaps also make out properties located just in the woodland areas that we see here. Again, slightly different image. Bin Farm located in this area, and we have the south-facing slopes that would accommodate the panels. Again, just draw your attention to the electricity pylons that provide some context, so solar development extending beyond the pylons that we see here into the area to the right-hand side of aerial photograph. We have the properties at cottages located at the bottom right, and Bin Farmhouse located in the area that we see at the left-hand side of the screen. So the areas to the north of those properties would accommodate solar panels. The access road to those properties, you see the houses located on the left-hand side of the screen, and you can see the land rising to their north. In terms of the detail of the proposal, draw your attention to the image at the bottom. You can see the cottages, the access to those properties, proposed landscaping that would be provided, hedging that would be provided, a vegetated swale to deal with runoff from the development, the fencing associated with the proposal, and then the panels. So a separation distance in the region of 50 metres that you can perhaps make out on the image that you see here. Again, photograph at the top right of the screen indicates that the properties do have reasonably open views to the south that would be unaffected by the proposal, but some of the properties do have upper floor windows, and there's no doubt that the visual impact in relation to these properties would be reasonably adverse. That, again, in itself is not a reason to refuse the proposal. The question that members is whether the impacts are so unacceptable that this would make this a less than desirable place to live, and that it would be in the public interest to resist the development for that reason. Again, just the proposal has been amended to include additional planting. As I said, this reflects historic field patterns, and again, that's going to provide some mitigation in relation to impacts from the properties that are closest to the south, and will also provide some mitigation in relation to concerns around glint and glare arising from the proposal. Moving to the north, we have North Bin Farmhouse, just located at the end of the woodland area that we see here. A detail of the proposal. So the property located here, you can see the area immediately in front of that dwelling to the south of it retained as open ground with new planting introduced, and the north-facing slope that would be directed towards the property remains free of development, standoff areas at either side of the property. Access to this house taken along the track that we see here, core path at the right-hand side of the screen, and hedging proposed along the track. So some mitigation proposed, but no doubt that the approaches to the property would change fairly significantly, and the visual impact on the property is again judged to be significant and adverse. Again, not a reason in itself to refuse the proposal. Members are required to make a judgment as to whether that impact would make this such an undesirable, unattractive place to reside that the public interest would lie in resisting the proposal. Now, in making that judgment, I would suggest members should have regard to other development proposals that you routinely consider. That might be new housing development, new employment development on the edge of towns where similar or greater impacts may be experienced by residents that live in those areas in relation to new development in their immediate environs. Again, just an additional photograph to those provided within the presentation itself. And this just shows the context of North Bin farmhouse itself. So you can see the woodland to the rear, some existing indicated. There would be standoff areas to the west, standoff areas to the east, and an open extent to the south of that property. Around, we have Grange of Berry Hill and properties at Berry Hill located just to the east and south. Grange of Berry Hill is occupied by someone that has a financial interest in the development. You can see some land between the properties at this location and the development site, and additional planting that's proposed in association with the proposal, including boundary hedgerow that would provide some screening from Berry Hill Road and would provide some screening for properties at Berry Hill. It's not going to mask the development. The development will remain a prominent and visible element in the landscape, irrespective of any planting that's provided. We have the core path. As I've indicated, again, the amenity of that path will change. It will change from a path that runs through agricultural fields to a path that runs through a solar farm development. There are areas of open land generally at different points along the route. So at the northern extent, the area to the east would remain undeveloped. The construction compound area would be restored to agricultural post-development. So an open area located to the west of the core path. And then in this area, we have the standoff area associated with the overhead lines, but undoubtedly significant change in relation to the amenity of the core path. But again, all of the impacts associated with this development have to be balanced against the wider benefit associated with the production of renewable energy, significant in this context, and significant potential carbon savings. So this is, again, just a photograph looking along Berry Hill Road. So this is looking in a westerly direction. We have the residential property. And again, you can see sections of the solar panels would be visible in this view. But in reality, the southern extent of the proposal is going to be visible along the length of Berry Hill Road itself, albeit mitigated in part by planting along the northern boundary of the road. But again, impacts in relation to properties in this area reasonably significant, but in officers' estimation, not unacceptable. Significant development proposal. It undoubtedly gives rise to adverse impacts. The question for committee is whether those impacts are considered unacceptable. The report sets out officers' evaluation of those impacts, having responses from statutory consultees. It has regard to the landscape guidance the council has produced, and it has regard to national policy and the Council's own development plan policies, which are generally very supportive of new renewable energy development. As a Council, we've identified that there's a climate change emergency, and in that respect, the proposal contributes towards addressing the generation of renewable energy. It contributes to carbon reduction, is considered to be compatible with development plan policy, and it's recommended for approval subject to the conditions before you. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Alan, for that very explicit presentation. We'll move on now to questions to our officer. I'm sure there must be questions. Councillor Nicholl.
Thank you very much, Convener. Thank you for your presentation. This is a very large site, and I've seen large sites of solar panels in California. From a distance, they look like a lake. Will the glare from this site be seen in Fife? That's it.
So the applicant has provided a glint and glare assessment in support of the application. That looks at a range of issues. It looks at potential impacts on the amenity of people in the vicinity of the proposal, and it considers potential impacts in relation to matters such as air safety. And you'll see from the report that we've undertaken consultation with the relevant bodies, and there's no objection in relation to air safety, and impacts in relation to the amenity of people that live in the vicinity are not considered to be unacceptable. We have a condition that seeks to ensure that appropriate mitigation is deployed in the event of complaint. I think there are now a number of solar developments in Angus. I provided members with a very small photograph of the development at the Gynde, and in that image, on a sunny day, albeit there are clouds in the sky, there was not huge reflection from the panels. Will the panels be visible from Fife in certain conditions? They may be. I think one of the photographs in the presentation provided an image that showed polytunnels in Invergowrie. Again, the reflectivity of polytunnels is a feature in the landscape. There may be comparisons to be drawn there.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Moore, followed by Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Convener. Yes.
Sorry, Convener, can I just interrupt him? Councillor Fotheringham had his hand up first.
Okay, well, I didn't see you, Councillor Fotheringham.
Sorry.
That's all right. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Mr. Hunter, for your very, as usual, professional and very detailed presentation. Mr. Hunter, you covered my roads query. There was no objection from Perth and Kinross and the impact of the sort of 19 vehicles with residents of Fowles in particular in 2018, along with one of our flooding experts, who informed that meeting that the area has a rising water table, and to protect their properties. And a lot of my constituents have put in submersible pumps. They've bought sandbags just to sort of try and protect their properties, because there is an awful lot of water runoff on that field, on these fields round about there. The fields round about it, there's some of them, as Gavin says, it's like a lake or a loch, and it's water. It's not just solar panels. The council have installed road liable to flooding signs. My concern here, are officers satisfied that this development won't cause least flood risk? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fotheringham, and I think understandable concerns from yourself and from residents. The applicant has provided information into flood risk and drainage, and that has been reviewed by SEPA, and it's been reviewed by the council's engineers, who have responsibility for flooding and drainage issues, and both have indicated no objection to the proposal. They've indicated that the arrangements for disposal of surface water runoff are acceptable.
Okay, thank you.
Right now, Councillor Moore, I think you're next.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, thank you, Alan. I've just got 3 queries for you. In paragraph 3.3, we're told how much new planting there will be. New woodland, new hedgerows. What's the net figure? How much is being lost? Because that doesn't seem to be referred to.
So my understanding is there is no proposal to remove existing woodland or hedgerow in association with the development. As I indicated, there may be a requirement for accommodation works on the access route from the A90 to the site, and there is certainly potential that that could involve some minor works either to existing hedgerow or trees, but that's not part of the proposal. In terms of the solar development itself, the indication is there's no loss of trees and no loss of existing hedgerow.
Right, so the reference in paragraph 8.11 to reintroducing historical field boundaries is additional planting, not replacing what's been removed.
That's correct.
And just one last question. You referred to the complaint procedure for glint and glare. Just trying to go down to it, condition 7. And do you really think that within 2 months from receipt of a complaint, it should be addressed? Or do you think really that if somebody is complaining that they're getting glint and glare, it should be addressed promptly? For example, within 2 weeks?
I recall we had a similar conversation in relation to the proposal at Berry Hill, Councillor Moore, and that's the condition that has been imposed at Berry Hill. I think the rationale for that is that the estimation of impact for glint and glare is that it's unlikely to occur at a level that would be significant, but the rationale for the 2-month period is to allow circumstances to potentially occur where that impact can be assessed and evaluated, and thereafter potential mitigation measures to be proposed and subsequently implemented.
But if you allow for 2 months, say for example the problem appears in spring, in April, by the time somebody's looking at it at the end of May, the conditions may well be totally different.
And the responsibility lies with the applicant to undertake the assessment and provide the information. If the circumstances are completely different in May, I guess the impact would no longer exist in May. So the immediacy of the issue is perhaps reduced.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Duff.
Yeah, thanks, Convener, and thanks to Mr Hunter for his full presentation. Can I just ask Mr Hunter that the question that slightly confusing me is, reading all the objections to the application, almost all of them cite a reason for objection is that this is, quote, prime agricultural land. Can you just clarify what the council is saying about this? Because I'm not that familiar with what 3.1 and 3.2 means. Can you maybe give us a bit of clarification as to what the council's view of the site is in terms of prime agricultural land?
I will try, Councillor Duff. There are published maps based on work that was done by Macaulay Land Use Research Institute a number of years ago. And those are produced generally at a scale of 1 to 250,000. In some of the lowland areas, they're produced at a scale of 1 to 50,000. So they are reasonably generic in terms of the definitions they provide. Prime agricultural land includes land that goes down to 3.1 in category. So category 1, category 2 and 3.1 is defined in planning policy as prime land. Now, on the 1 to 50,000 scale land use classification plans, an area around about 18 hectares at the eastern extent of the site is identified as being class 3.1. Other parts of the site, the areas to the west, range between 3.2 and I think 4.1 perhaps. I'm not certain about that, but the areas to the west certainly will fall below the definition of prime quality agricultural land. The area at the east, around about 18 hectares of the entire site, is identified as prime land. The applicant has produced a specific analysis of soil conditions on the site, and that indicates that the majority of the site is 3.2. So the indication is that the majority of the site is not prime quality agricultural land. I would draw members' attention to policy PV20 in the papers before you, and that indicates that development proposals on prime agricultural land will only be supported where they constitute renewable energy development and are supported by a commitment to a bond commensurate with site restoration requirements. So even if the view is taken that this is prime quality land, members' policies, the council's policies, allow renewable energy development on that land.
Yeah, thanks very much. That's a very clear answer, Mr. Hunter. Thanks for that indeed.
Yes, Councillor Brace, I think you're next.
Yes, thanks, Convener, and thanks, Mr. Hunter, for a very informative presentation, as always. Firstly, when it comes to the definition of prime agricultural land, yes, we do have the classifications available to us in those maps, and that's what we, to a large extent, have to base decisions on. But these land classifications, they can be really quite broad, because there's all sorts of things are considered in the classification of land, and you could well have a situation where you have what is actually extremely good agricultural land that, because of perhaps altitude or something else, isn't considered to be prime and classed as 1, 2 or 3.1. And you mentioned the solar farm at Ballachy. The land there is of a far superior quality to what we're looking at today, and it was granted. But my question is on 8.31, page 55, when we're talking about roads here. Now, there have been concerns raised by members of the public about the capacity of the road networks to cope with this. And I think all of these have been answered, but it does mention that a traffic management plan is proposed. And as a condition, could you tell us a wee bit about a traffic management plan, what it consists of, and how it's going to help in this situation, please?
I will certainly try, Councillor Brays. The requirement for the traffic management plan is at the request of Perth and Kinross Council predominantly. I think that request is supported by our own roads colleagues. The condition in the papers before you, so I think it's condition 2C on page 61, sets out some of the issues that a traffic management plan would be expected to deal with, and that would be the routing of any abnormal loads, the type and volumes of vehicles that would use the road, proposed accommodation work, so that may be a requirement for the provision of passing places. It might be localised road widening. It might be traffic management measures that are in place whilst particular types of vehicle are accessing the site. So it might be a traffic light arrangement at areas where there are particular constraints. The details of that would be matters that would be submitted by the developer and agreed with our roads colleagues and colleagues at Perth and Kinross Council in order to try and mitigate the impact. As I've indicated, we're looking at an average of 19 vehicle movements per day. That's an average figure, so it could be higher, it could be lower. 19 vehicles over a 10 or 11 hour construction day in average terms is reasonably small. I think what members should take from the report is the comfort that colleagues at Perth and Kinross Council are satisfied that the road network can accommodate the development.
Well, thank you very much for that. It just gives me a wee bit more clarity and might be useful for any members of the public considering this too. Thanks.
Thank you. Any more questions to the officer before we move on? I see no more hands up, so we'll move on to, we have a list of speakers, so we'll move on to our speakers that we have this morning. So the first speaker we'll have is Phillips from the Community Council. Are you with us, Mr. Phillips?
Good morning, I am certainly here.
Yes, I'll let you know you have 5 minutes.
Right. First of all, I would like to highlight the human rights issues. It states that everyone is entitled to own property and entitled to enjoyment of this without any hindrance or interference. The size of this development certainly interferes with the enjoyment of the people living in that area. Next point, flooding is a major concern, which has been highlighted by the number of people who have written into the council regarding this. The other one is, it should be noted that arable land in Scotland accounts for less than 10% of the land area. We cannot afford to lose land on this scale. We have lost quite a bit in this area already with the Western Gateway development. There's also housing schemes outside, just in the outskirts of Forfar, taking up agricultural land. And the other thing is, I also note that a request has for a 2-year extension to the normal starting time for this development. A presentation by the applicant, it was stated that construction will start probably as soon as planning application was permitted. This seems to be setting off alarm bells. Now, with all the offshore wind installations going on around the East Coast, is this development really necessary? Could this be the reason for the extension of the start date, to find out how the land lies once these offshores come on stream? Now, also mentioned this morning, council policy allow prime land to be used for renewals. Council also have another policy that states that rural developments should be small and a direct benefit to the area. Sorry, this does not meet either of those. That is more or less all I have to say on it at this moment in time. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Mr. Phillips. Any questions to Mr. Phillips? No questions. I'll give you time because this is quite an important application. No, there's no questions to Mr. Phillips. Well, thank you, Mr. Phillips. We move on to our next speaker, who is Dennis Speedy, an objector. Dennis Speedy, are you with us?
Yes, I've unmuted my microphone. Can you all hear me?
You have 5 minutes.
Yep. Good morning. This planning application is probably one of the most important you will ever have to consider. There's probably never been an application for a development of this type and scale in such a sensitive area. You may refuse this application, and indeed you should refuse this application. I'd like to speak about plans, the application process and the land. Firstly, this application is against your development plan, a plan so carefully written and consulted upon. Angus residents should have confidence in the plan and that it is adhered to. Your report makes reference to the landscape capacity assessment to evaluate solar PV developments. There is a serious and misleading error in the report before you. It states, it's indicated there is a medium capacity for solar development. This assessment clearly shows this to be an area of low capacity, and low capacity is defined as thus. It's a landscape that's both sensitive to solar PV development and has high value where only a slight level of change can be accommodated without significantly affecting any of the key defining criteria. Where capacity is considered to exist, it may only be in relation to smaller scale development. Maybe enough to cover a farm roof, but 300 acres, 150,000 panels? This is one of the largest, if not the largest, solar arrays proposed for Scotland. The site is 6,560 feet long, 7.5 times the length of the Titanic. No one in Forfar High Street would call this small or even medium scale. The report itself states, quote, the proposal would give rise to adverse impact on the landscape and visual amenity of the area. You've already designated a huge area for solar in Angus. There is no need whatsoever to allow more just to suit this applicant. And if you don't refuse this, there would be a precedent. You'd be defenceless against any other similar developments. A neighbouring farmer, for example, said, quote, he was hugely supportive of it. Granting this application would run a coach and horses through your plan, it would be broken, your plan would be wasted. And cumulative effects might protect the next field, but it wouldn't protect similar farmland and Liff or Muirhead or an Ochta House, long before we see another 300-acre solar array, and then another. The proposed development is huge and of national and local importance. Had it just been 0.1 megawatt output more, it would have been considered at national government level. Angus planners deemed it unnecessary that a full environmental impact assessment be done, and I find this absolutely astonishing. We really don't know how a development of this type and scale, unprecedented, could impact sloping farmland close to homes and with a limited infrastructure. An EIA would have been required by central government by law had it been just 0.1 megawatt larger. Surely the spirit of the law is as important here as the letter of the law. Surely because of its scale and its unique setting in much cherished Angus countryside, this development merited a full EIA. Not to insist on this was a failure of the common sense test. And lastly, the land. Last summer, this good land grew broccoli, peas, carrots, and cereal crops. A map published by the Macaulay Institute for Soil Research shows quite clearly that this land is class 3.1 prime and class 3.2 subprime, which is very much at odds with the applicant's snapshot assessment of a mix of classes 3.2, 4.1, 4.2 and 5.3. These food crops are real products, not something almost 90% inefficient, like this development where you would need 9 panels to get the full power of 1. And this is important. On average, UK solar arrays are only 11.2% efficient, with a fall around 15% south to north. 152,000 panels with an export capacity of 49.9 megawatts would in reality just export 5.6 megawatts of power to the grid. It's grossly inefficient and greedy if huge swathes of land offshore wind power is 40% efficient. Protecting the rural environment and its communities brings us heavy responsibility. In pursuing the renewable agenda in Scotland, we need to play to our strengths, which are wind and wave. and not destroy our countryside by pursuing our weakness, which is solar. The sheer scale of the development required to make solar viable will simply destroy our rural environment, which is so cherished. Please consider carefully.
Right, thank you, Mr. Speedy. Any questions to Mr. Speedy? Councillor Moore, then followed by Councillor Durno.
Thank you, Convener. It's not so much to Mr. Speedy, but he's made a number of points that I would appreciate an officer response to.
Well, we're dealing with questions to Mr. Speedy. Questions to Mr. Speedy.
Yeah, all I'm saying is I would appreciate an officer response at some point.
Okay, carry on then, Councillor Moore.
And I haven't got questions for Mr. Speedy. What I'm saying is I wish an officer response to Mr. Speedy's comments at some point.
Okay, we'll have comments later on, so we'll carry on with questions to Mr. Speedy. Councillor Durno.
Thanks, Mr. Speedy. Really good. What you were saying there was really good. Do you think if the development was a quarter of the size of what it is anticipated, it would be more acceptable to the residents? If it fitted in better with the community and didn't take over that whole house and everything. Do you think if it was smaller, it would be more acceptable and workable?
The answer is no. To me, this development is for a brownfield site. Of course, the reason it can't be on a brownfield site is because such is the scale of solar farms, because they are so inefficient that they're required to take over swathes of countryside. I don't think it is suitable to put solar power on a greenfield site under any circumstances. I think they should be on brownfield sites. There was a proposal, I don't know if it ever went ahead, for a large solar array on a disused airfield outside Elgin. I would support that. I think that's acceptable.
Thanks for that. That's advice. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions to Mr. Speedy? We'll move on to our next speaker, who is Mike Donald. Are you with us, Mr. Donald?
Hi, I'm here. I'll try to put on my camera just for a wee while. Hi, everybody. I am a resident on Binns Farm Road. It's our house that's shown on the little cross section for the mitigation. Okay, so I put in an objection. My objections were based on the carbon life cycle. So we hear about the carbon benefits in the use phase for the solar panels, but no one has answered, and it has actually been omitted from the report in front of you. No one has answered at what cost of production and transport all the way from China. Okay, it is suggested in the applicant's response to my objection, it's at 1.5 years. I think it's a wee bit more than that. But it's over 2 years worth of the gain. The entire gain from this is just taking up getting the stuff here. Okay, I think that's important to consider because we haven't actually decided in the application. It is clearly mentioned that the panels to be chosen haven't been decided, so there is no conclusion on what the technical panel infrastructure is going to be, and therefore when we lead on to all the stuff about amenity, we don't know how many solar panels we're going to need because we haven't decided what we're going to build them from. Okay, now there is a development that's recently taken place in Durham by BP Light Source, the people who were previously involved in this development, and they walked away. And that uses bifacial solar panels. It's got solar collecting facets on both sides, and they're extremely more efficient, following on from the point that Mr. Speedy made. If this was an environmental application, we would be required by environmental law to use the best available technique. And there doesn't seem to be any equivalent in this process. Led into lots of discussions about loss of amenity, views, on the impact on the landscape. Could I please ask that a specific condition is put on to use the best possible technology to minimize the amount of panels that are required? And therefore, that leads on to the second part of my comment, that it will be a direct impact. It's recognised as significant and adverse at my own personal property and my neighbours around me. And could we please ask that if this does go ahead, that there is more consultation on the final mitigation. First of all, if we use a better technology, it can be further away. 50 metres is mentioned, but roughly 100 metres from the house, there's a natural break on the landscape where they would become invisible to all residents close by, just at the bottom triangle where the woodland comes down. So that could be possible if we used a better technology, and at least could we please have mitigation that's agreed with us, because the plans that are in front of you today are quite substantially different from what was discussed with us at consultation. Okay, and I realise there are developments in the design process, but yeah, could we please have a condition that satisfies the visual amenity in the same way that you have put in a condition for the Glinton glare? Okay, and I think these are the main points that I would like to make this morning. Oh, there is one other on the maintenance. The gentleman showed the hedgerows that are allowed to grow over time. Could we please have a condition that requires the hedgerows to be maintained? Because for all as they're designed to grow up to 3 metres, required to be maintained. And I would very much like to see that enforceable as a burden on the landowner or Solar 2 or whoever the legal party is at that time in the event that the maintenance doesn't come to pass. Okay, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Donald, for all those comments. I think quite a few of those is maybe taken in the report to your concerns, but however, do any members have any questions to Mr. Donald? No questions to Mr. Donald. Well, thank you, Mr. Donald, for those comments.
Okay, thank you.
Move on to Martin Menzies. Martin Menzies, are you with us? Martin Menzies.
I'll just check this, convener, if you just bear with me 1 second. Convener, it would appear the gentleman has left the meeting.
Okay, right, thank you. Well, we'll just move on to our next speaker, who is Kirsty Smith. Are you with us, Kirsty Smith?
Hello, yes, I am. Can you hear?
You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. So my name is Kirsty, and myself and my young family live at North Bins, which I would hope that you're all aware of my family home, given that if you approve this application today, it will soon be surrounded by a sea of glass and plastic and lined with 3-metre high fences, not forgetting the CCTV cameras. Our home doesn't have windows to the rear of the property, and that factored with the topography of the landscape, the enormous size of this proposal, means we'll have no relief from the change in the landscape. Forgive me if I seem a bit nervous, but I feel like I've done something wrong and you're the jury deciding mine and my family's fate. Not only do we not want to move, but we can't afford to just up and sell. This is our life savings, our blood, sweat and tears, our family's memories and future that is being decided today. We won't just be losing out on the beautiful walks that surround us and the abundance of wildlife that call this site home. We will lose everything. I'm not here today to bad talk solar power or any renewable energy sources, as my family are 100% behind these. We want a happy and healthy future for our son, but I'm here to tell you that this is the wrong site. I've done a little reading over the past year and I've tried to upskill myself on solar power as best as possible. I believe the ideal sites required for solar stations are called brownfield sites, and I want to tell you this is not a brownfield site. It's a gloriously green piece of Angus heaven. It's not just our home. Deer, badgers, red squirrels, birds of prey and bats all call this land home. I'm not a farmer, I'm not an expert, but the years I've lived here, I've seen season after season of great crops grown in all of these fields that have been classed as low grade. Peas, broccoli, carrots, turnips, grains, all of them. Why do they grow here? Because the soil is great. It's some of the best in the country. I appreciate that mitigations have been undertaken to soften some of the issues we've raised, but I live on this site. I know and see what happens here on a daily basis. The issue of flooding is real, given the fact that this site is not flat as it ideally should be for a solar plant. And when it rains, the fields fill with water and it runs, quite honestly, like a small stream onto the bins track and it pools on the Berry Hill roads. I'm speaking to you today as a mother, and I'm going to do my utmost to protect my son from anything that might harm him. We don't yet know the long-term risks associated with electromagnetic radiation, and quite frankly, I don't want to know. There's also a massive risk of fire, given that the land will be covered in solar panels. We have one road in and one road out to our house. What are we going to do if a fire happens? This is ultimately affecting my family's physical and mental well-being for a considerable amount of time, potentially the rest of our lives. I strongly believe that of my family's human rights, and I ask you, put yourself in my shoes. Do you class any of this as desirable? Would you be comfortable giving the go-ahead today if this was a family member of yours, a friend of yours? I can wholeheartedly say that I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsty. Any questions to Kirsty after that heart-rendering speech? No. Well, thank you, Kirsty. Sure, we'll take on board what you've been saying.
Thanks.
Move on to Sarah. Will you keep me right now here?
Is now joining.
Virgin Mills, regarding Virginia Mills.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Sarah.
Hi, it's Sarah Giaconelli. Hello, I'm a resident of Fowles for 20 years and I'm here to support my planning objection against the proposal for the largest solar farm in Scotland at Berry Hill. Solar power is the least productive renewable energy. Sorry, I'm getting a bit upset after Kirsty's talk. Harnessing power intermittently at only 11% efficiency. One single offshore turbine provides as much electricity as 200 acres of solar panels. I'm not against solar energy, but this isn't the right place. There are alternatives. The definition of a farm is an area of land together with buildings used for growing crops, raising animals, usually to sell them. Sorry. This application will seriously diminish the capabilities of this farm, converting it into an industrial-sized power station. To feed the power to the grid requires further disruption to reach Dundee. There are options to locate solar panels somewhere more suitable. The report states the proposal would give rise to significant and adverse landscape and visual impact. If this development is approved, the mitigation via new planting will never hide this monstrosity. As shown during the pandemic, this community is a heart and soul with residents who care about their neighbours. It will be devastating to the community and visitors alike who enjoy the local amenities by ruining the landscape, affecting wildlife, destroying the farmland for 40 years, if not forever. That's a tragedy. The area has numerous walks people enjoy to improve their physical and mental well-being. It will be turned into a power station surrounded by 4 kilometres of 3-metre-high fencing and CCTV. This isn't a densely populated area. 136 people objected, including our community council and an independent planning consultant engaged by Spare. Residents care about their community, and I hope the committee have taken the time to read our individual pleas. The Angus Council guidelines point out this area falls into low suitability for solar and advise against the use of sloping hills, to which renders this site inappropriate as panels will be seen from Fife. Our local area is badly affected by extreme weather, which is increasing. The residents of Binsbury Hills and Fowles can confirm this. Have any of you had to stay up 24 hours a night for a period of days to pump water from your house to stop it flooding? If you grant this application and properties are affected by flooding when the land is covered in metal, the council must be held liable for damage. According to the Macaulay Land Capability for Agricultural website, this area includes prime arable land, yet the applicant's submitted assessment has downgraded this. Surely the applicant's statement should be independently verified. If the land is so poor, why would the highly respected James Hutton Institute farm in the adjacent fields? The prime land provides a wide range of crops annually. Removing this productive farmland should be a last resort. There are alternatives for solar, such as brownfield sites and large rooftops. Granting this application absolutely sets a precedent for farmland to be industrialised across the area. And what about your duty of care not to harm the public? There are so many unknowns relating to the health risks, including cancer with electromagnetic rays when in close proximity to solar. Your decision today is effectively gambling our corner of rural Angus, aiming to balance renewable energy goals against the impact on the local area. Do you have a crystal ball? How will the landowners in 40 years decommission the site? Will the bond be enough? Do the environmental credentials add up? Does it comply with the council's green policies? How much carbon will be consumed manufacturing the panels, shipping from China, building the site, decommissioning and disposing the panels? The carbon will be vast compared to the estimated 20,000 a year output from the site. Land is finite. We're in a food security crisis. What about the carbon implications of importing goods into the country from overseas? For decades, the British taxpayer has subsidised farmers to support food production. I appreciate farming has its difficulties, as do many other businesses and local authorities. Groups throughout the UK are campaigning Parliament to stop this unregulated development of 49.9 megawatt solar farms, which will be the death of UK agriculture and food security. Similar developments in the UK were recommended for approval by their planning department, but their committees didn't agree. Finally, please take a moment to think about how long the new planting will take to establish to minimise the visibility of this industrial site. 5-10 years, if ever. Think about the young family at North Bins who will have to drive through an industrial site surrounded by fencing and CCTV to reach their homes, and the homes on the Bins Farm Road, which will be subject to noise and views of the arrays. Would you want to live here? I urge the committee to refuse it on behalf of the people who reside and visit this beautiful area. We want to save and protect the rural environment. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, was that Virginia Mills that was speaking?
No, that was...
Sorry, convener, that was Sarah Giaconelli. So I think she also is going to present on behalf of Mrs. Mills as well.
Yes. So first of all, do we have any questions to Sarah? No questions. Okay, Sarah, will you carry on with the...
Bear with me while I open up Ginny's video.
Yes.
So, sorry, Sarah, can I just advise that there's no option for you to present, so we would ask you just to play the audio for the committee and Mrs. Mills's presentation, please?
That's fine, just 1 second. So basically, if I just play it, Sarah, you will hear this, yeah?
That's correct.
Okay, right, I'm just about to press play. Right, once again, on my mouse, sorry. Right, go. That's it.
Forgive me for reading this, it's just so I don't lose my words. I live with my husband and our 2 young girls near the proposed solar array development. We moved into the country to raise our family, and we spent our savings building our house here. We use the Berry Hill area regularly for walking, hiking, cycling and running. This development, should it go ahead, would cover our beloved area in glass and high fences. During the development, the road would be dangerously busy. There would be no more weekend bike rides where our eldest is learning to ride her bike, or the wildlife spotting walks with our youngest in their carrier. Our world, the one that we chose, the one that we invested our savings in, would be changed forever. And it's not just us. There are members of our community, also with young families, but they would be completely surrounded by the glass and high fences. So should we all choose to move in the event that this development gets the go-ahead, well, what would that do to our house values? And then what stead would we be in? How could this development build even be in concordance with our human rights? And as if that isn't enough, where is the information regarding the safety of the electromagnetic field radiation? We all remember a time when asbestos and glyphosate, Roundup, were safe. Research here is still in its infancy, and studies in the past have pointed towards a link of increased childhood cancer rates. Others have shown it's caused physical symptoms such as headache and other illnesses. I highlighted this concern on my planning portal objection, and yet I haven't had a reply. I beg you, councillors, to put yourselves in our, the local community's position. How would you feel if it was your home and families and neighbourhoods being surrounded in glass and fences? With not only your recreation and financial position at risk, but also the health of your children. We are all for solar, but not in a residential area. There are far more suitable ground sites to be used. We are begging you to put yourselves in our position and see the human impact this would have on our families. Thank you.
Okay, that's Ginny's presentation finished.
Right, okay, right, thank you. Well, we'll move on to our next speaker, who would be Ian Finlay. Ian Finlay, are you with us?
Yes, indeed I am, convener. I'm just turning my camera on and also my mic. Yeah, can you see and hear me, convener? Yes?
Yes, hear you perfectly well.
Okay, thank you for that. Convener, can I say at the outset, I'm not resident in Fowles area. I'm on the outskirts of Dundee, on the western outskirts of Dundee. However, I do visit the area regularly. I have friends and family there, so I know the area very well. I find it difficult to add much to what other speakers have already said, but I'm still going to give it a damn good try. No one these days can be opposed to the principle of green energy and the efforts to become carbon neutral. But, and there is always a but, any green energy development should only be acceptable if it does not have a cumulative and significant negative impact on the local environment and on residents where it is being proposed the development would be located. I would argue that is exactly the situation that exists in relation to Berryhill Farm's solar array proposal before the committee today. No one should be under any illusions that this is anything other than a massive industrial development. The application proposes erecting 152,000 large solar panels on a site covering almost 300 acres. The panels are sufficient to give everyone in Dundee a panel and still have thousands left over. The size of the site equivalent to between 250 and 300 football pitches. There would also have to be a new built environment in the shape of substations and transformers and accommodation for storage, office and communications requirements, further changing this rural arable farmland location into a giant industrial site visible for miles in many directions. The whole site would be surrounded by security fencing, as you've heard, and watched over by security cameras. This application drives a coach and horses through accepted guidelines for the location of such solar array, including that they should not be sited on sloping land and not overlooked. Councillors, there is a reason why the proposed solar power station is so large, and it is the huge flaw in the solar array scenario, and that's inefficiency. Available figures, as you've already heard, show that the efficiency of such solar arrays is around just 11%, with this figure decreasing the further north you go. As a consequence, to make the returns that the applicants require for the development to be attractive to investors if it is improved, the Berryhill Farm solar array would have to be very, very large, one of the biggest in Scotland, and on a par with some of the biggest in the UK. Solar 2 have trumpeted that the 49.9 megawatt capacity of the proposed Berryhill Farm site would have the capacity to generate enough electricity for 12,500 Angus homes. However, the reality is that this figure would never be achieved, not by a long chalk. The site would do well to achieve 1/10 of that total, and it would certainly fall far short of offsetting 20,070 tonnes of CO2 per year, as also trumpeted by the applicants. The planning report to the committee today states that, and I quote, "In this case it is indicated the proposal would generate a significant amount of renewable energy and that contribution merits weight in the decision-making process." Well, I would argue that in reality that weight has been very much shed, particularly when it is balanced against the impact the proposed solar array would have on the local rural environment and those living in the area, particularly those closest to the site in question. Then, of course, there is the loss of a substantial amount of important arable land that would result from the development of the solar array in an area categorised development. The land involved in this application is not some infertile swathe suitable only for the grazing of sheep, but good arable land that has grown a wide variety of cereal and vegetable crops for many years, as the local council members for the area can no doubt confirm. It was interesting to read in the farming columns of the Courier on January 29th that Angus Council has formed a new partnership with a number of companies aimed at propelling the region to the forefront of agricultural innovation. In the article, the council's leader, Mr. Fairweather, said, and I quote, "The agricultural industry plays a vital role in international, national and regional strategic priorities for the economic development, food security and environmental sustainability." It would be a cruel irony, councillors, if just days after announcing this new partnership, the council was to approve the Solar 2 application and, as a consequence, delete some 300 acres from the bank of arable land in Angus for 2 generations. And if it is given the go-ahead, could other similar developments follow locally and nationally because of a precedent set at Berryhill? The report to committee states that approval of the application would not establish a binding or irresistible precedent for further development in this area. It's hard to imagine how the council could refuse an application replicating the circumstances of the Berryhill Road proposals, and if it did refuse, then an applicant would not win out on appeal. If this application is approved, it will have a huge impact on the local community, as you've heard from some of the people in the area. Some will be faced with the reality of having to go backwards and forwards through the solar arrays to go to and from their home, probably under scrutiny of cameras. The report to committee concedes there will be an adverse impact for some of those closest to the solar array. It argues that an actual or apprehended, but it also said that any negative impact is not considered unacceptable. It also argues that any, quotes, actual or apprehended infringement of human rights resulting from the development is justified. I doubt any of those living closest to this proposed development would agree for 1 minute with these highly subjective assertions. In fact, I would contest that the report to the committee is actually a very good argument for rejecting the Solar 2 application on a range of planning grounds. Councillors, this area of important arable land, which also features significant and varied wildlife, has been marketed around possible interested parties as a solar array site for several years. Less than 3 years ago, Lightsource BP unveiled proposals for a development very similar to that now proposed by Solar 2. However, after consultations with the local community, Lightsource BP scrapped its plans. The company said at that time that additional information it had obtained from the consultations with the local community, in combination with its own environmental assessments, suggested the Berryhill Road site was not suitable for the proposed installation. Councillors, that was the right decision in 29. It should be the right decision now. This latest proposal is totally unsuitable for the site involved, and I would urge you to thank you for your time.
Right, okay, right, thank you. That's your 5 minutes and slightly more. Do you have any questions to Mr. Finlay? No questions? Okay, right, thank you. We'll now move on to our next speaker, Neil Lindsay, applicant. Neil Lindsay, I see you there, so give your presentation.
Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, this project at 49.9 would add to Angus's current 36 megawatts of operating utility scale renewable energy projects. So in one go would actually double the amount of renewable energy being generated at a utility scale in Angus. It will provide the electricity equivalent of 1 in every 5 houses in Angus. And as you heard from Alan Hunter earlier, is recommended for approval. It doesn't have any statutory objections other than that from the Community Council. Now that we understand there is a very vocal local minority who don't like this project, and you've heard from them today, but just to put this into perspective, 66 letters of objection were received from households within the Community Council area, the ones close to the project. That's 66 out of 1,571 households, which represents 4.2%, which means 95.8% of local households have not objected to this project. But throughout our consultation process and through obviously the letters of objections you've read and what we heard today, there are quite a number of points that have been flagged up. So if you'll bear with me, I'll just talk about them in brief. There is obviously a concern about increased flooding risk, and quite understand there have been flooding in the village of Fowles, and that must be very worrying for those people affected. We undertook, our consultants undertook a detailed flood risk assessment, and as you heard from Alan Hunter, there are both SEPA and your own Roads Department, Drainage Department have agreed there's no increase of flood risk. But we didn't want to stop there. We said there's an opportunity now to maybe improve the situation. So together with the landowner and with the scientists at the James Hutton Institute, we've come up with a very detailed drainage management plan, which includes putting what they call magic margins or vegetative swales around the site to actually hold back any water surface runoff and actually decrease the chances of flooding. And again, this has been picked up by in your planner's report, that actually if this project was to go ahead, the likelihood that flooding would actually decrease and actually therefore put the area in a better position from a flood risk point of view. On the traffic and transport, Deliberations, you were asking about that. Obviously, we've spoken about the route keeping away from the village of Fowles, but something that's maybe slightly forgotten about in all this is once this project is built, it's not going to have intensive arable farming going on. And there is, on average, according to our landowner, about 1 Arctic lorry required per acre per year, whether that's delivering pesticides, fertilizers, seeds, or obviously removing the crops at the end. So actually, what that means is over the lifetime of the project, and there's over 11,800 less vehicle movements, because obviously there's not going to be those requirements. So actually, it'll make the roads a lot quieter and hopefully safer for people living round about. We've spoken about the impact on wildlife. Again, we did a lot of assessment on that, where evidence of badgers and bats and protected species were identified, suitable buffers were put in place. Nature Scott have not objected to this. But again, taking this further, we're putting in over 4 kilometres of new hedgerows, creating wildlife corridors to move in and around the site. It's well known throughout the UK, solar projects offer a significant diversity net gain. So actually there'll be a better habitat for invertebrates and pollinators, because it will be put down to grasses and wildflowers. So it'll actually be a more environmentally rich environment. Councillor Duff, you were asking about quality of agricultural land losses. I think one thing just to remember, we're not carpeting this area in tarmac or building new houses. This is not a permanent project. It's for 40 years, at which point it will be totally decommissioned. The quality of the land from the Macaulay maps is now quite out of date. The science done that was in the early 80s. And what we do throughout our projects, and everyone else does, is to get independent soil scientists to check the current quality. And it's what's very worrying is that in that intervening 40 years since that Macaulay maps are produced, the land quality has dropped a grade. So if that was to continue, that would be a worrying situation. What we're doing is storing up this land, so in 40 years' time, it can then be used back for food production. There will still be sheep grazing on it, so there's still going to be an element of farming going on. But again, the independent soil experts have confirmed that because there's going to be no pesticides, no fertilizers put onto it, no ploughing, the soil will have an opportunity to improve. So at the end of this cycle, there'll actually be a better quality land left than there is today. There's a question about recreation and tourism. The core paths and walking routes will remain open for the project, so people's enjoyment of the area will not be stopped. And obviously, Piper Dam Golf and Leisure Resort is the main tourism venue in the area, was one that we wanted to consult with, and we met with them a number of occasions, provide them with visualizations. We actually modified the design by taking some of the panels on the top northern west corner away, and you will note that Piper Dam have not objected to this project. On the landscape and visual side, we've worked hard with your countryside officer to mitigate impacts of this, both at a wider level and at a local level. And your officers have agreed that the visual amenity of occupants of the properties is not considered unacceptable. So in their view, this project is acceptable on a landscape and visual. And again, Nature Scott, from a landscape perspective, haven't objected. And just summing up, we believe this project will be adding to both Angus and Scotland's, renewable energy generations targets, and has the opportunity to make a positive impact on the local area by improving wildlife, reducing flood risk, reducing the amount of traffic on the roads. And just to finish up with, I'd just like to leave you with a quote, if that's okay. Tackling climate change requires committed action at a local level. Local authorities have a key role to play to reduce carbon emissions and build resilience. Now, those could have been my words, but they weren't. Those could have been the words of one of the world leaders at COP26 in November in Glasgow, when we were all told how important renewable energy is for climate change, but they weren't. Ladies and gentlemen, those were your words from Angus's Sustainable Energy and Climate Action Plan. So I urge you to heed your own words and consent this project. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Questions. I see Councillor Duff, you have your hands up. You have a question to Mr. Lindsay.
Yes, thanks, Convener. Thanks, Mr. Lindsay. Yeah, I just wanted to try and get to the bottom of this question of efficiency. A number of the objectors have quoted this 11% figure. Now, I'm not quite sure what they mean by that. This is a 50 megawatt scheme. Is that 50 megawatts theoretical or 50 megawatts actual output to the national grid? Because I'm a little bit unclear. Can you give us a bit of education on that one?
I'll try. So basically, megawatts is the type of generation. Obviously, megawatt hours is the actual electricity that's produced. So to work out how many megawatt hours, you take the number of hours in the year, which is 870, you times it by the actual capacity of the project, 49.9, and then you times it by the capacity factor of how efficient the panels are converting electricity. And we're looking at about 10.3 to 11%. Now that's over a whole year. That's 24 hours a day over a year. So obviously solar doesn't produce at night time. So that that's and it also doesn't produce on very, very cloudy days. But it's basically over a whole year, it's efficient, 10.3%. So from that figure, you get to how many megawatt hours is production, which for this project is about 45,000. So to convert that into units of electricity that we all have on our electricity bills, you times that by 1,000. So it'd be 45 million units of electricity per year. That's how much will be produced.
Great, thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor Duff?
Yes, I think it does. And your estimation is this will provide enough electricity for 12,500 homes. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, if I just finish, so you've got 45 million units of electricity. Okay, the average household in UK, and this is some government sort of statistics, uses 3,748, very precise figure, units of electricity. So just divide that by your total, you get to 12,027 houses. Angus has, I think, about just over 54,480 households in the last sort of census, which that figure equates to 22%. So it's 22% of households in Angus's electricity requirements will be generated by this project.
Great, thank you. Councillor Dunno, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I'm extremely worried about the lady whose house is right in the middle of this project. Is there any way that you could leave your solar panels around her property to the last of the build, if you could see my point? Or even if any landscaping or anything, that could really help this situation? Because, I mean, you personally probably wouldn't want to live in a house that's surrounded by solar panels either. I don't think anybody would. But if there's anything that could be done to make things right, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, we understand the views of the house. So as you saw from the presentation that Alan Hunter gave, there is, already trees and screening essentially on sort of three sides of the house, so that the main view looking south at the north-facing slope in front of you has been left completely bare. But we actually went further than that, and rather than just leaving a corridor, we created a sort of visual splay away from the house. And in that area, there will be, wildflower meadows and native tree species to create a bit of a sort of parkland environment. And then on the access road coming in and out, we put in proposed for hedgerows either side to block views. I think it's important to say at this stage that throughout this process, we have tried to engage. We have emailed and phoned, and at the public exhibition offered to sit down with them and bring them into this design process. And I'm afraid on every occasion that offer was rejected. We also offered to all the neighbours a site visit to the Errol solar farm. We took the community councillors there for a site visit so they could understand how an operating solar farm just around the corner. They talked to the operators about the day-to-day sort of runnings of it. We made the same offer to the local residents, but again, that offer still stands, but up to now it hasn't been taken up.
Thank you. Any more questions to Mr. Lindsay? Councillor Moore. You're muted, Councillor Moore.
Presentation, Mr. Lindsay. One thing you said was you were not carpeting with tarmac and you will remove it after 40 years.
Uh-huh.
How are you going to maintain the ground underneath all the panels? Because for 40 years, you're not going to have any sort of machinery that's going to be able to look after it.
So what happens with solar projects is generally one of two things. They're either sowed with grass seed, so they're put back to grass essentially, or more of a sort of wildflower meadows, so mixed species of local flowers. So again, aimed at increasing pollinators, invertebrates, and creating more environmentally rich environment. So at the moment, a lot of those hills are used for tatties and carrots, etc. So they're planted in ridges. That'll all be be smoothed off and seeded with grass, and then it will be sort of probably a rotation of sheep grazing going through at the end of the season to essentially top that grass. So there will still be farming, i.e. sheep farming on it, grazing, as well as wildflower meadows and grass, and that's what it'll be. So at the end of the project, you'll basically just get left with grassland, which can then be ploughed up if they want to carry on. But it will be a better quality of soil than it is now.
Right, just one other question. Once we've covered all these fields with solar arrays, where are we going to grow our food?
Well, this is going to be a small fraction of the amount of agricultural land available. I mean, there's a question as to for us developing a project, we have to look at a whole range of things to make a project viable. And in the UK, the most important thing is availability of a viable grid connection. Obviously, there is one here in Dundee, close by, which made this area, suitable. Vast areas of Scotland, there is no grid available. So actually, the amount of land suitable for a solar project is relatively small in that regard. But as I said, Councillor Moore, I know 40 years is a long temporary, but it is not a permanent infrastructure, and it will get decommissioned in line with your own decommissioning requirements.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions, Mr. Lindsay? No more questions. Right. Thank you, Mr. Lindsay, for answering your questions. We'll now move on to comments and debate. Members, before we come to a decision on this very important application. So we'll start with you, Councillor Durno.
Yeah, sorry, I'm muted. I just wanted to say, for the future of solar energy to be successful, solar facilities must be harmonised with the ecosystem, the agricultural and human needs. If local communities are excluded and overlooked, the benefits of renewable energy could be outweighed by negative consequences. If innovative strategies and inclusive approaches continue to gain momentum, the future of solar energy fields will be bright. So we have to look at both sides of the story and try and come to a conclusion on this one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Durno. Councillor Nicholl.
Thank you very much. I was missed. I had my hand up for Mr. Lindsay, but I'll do it as a comment. At a previous meeting with Sea Green, the wind turbine people, they were asked if they were putting in surplus cabling for future development. They said the grid was not able to take any more input. That was the question I was going to be asking. Thank you.
We'll allow you that question to be asked, Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholl. Yes, we have secured a grid connection at just opposite Asda on the Kingsway in Dundee, and we secured that about a year and a half ago now. So, and that also gets back to a previous question about why we've moved from a 3-year to a 5-year planning requirement. It's again, we're waiting on SSE to have the final connection date for the upgrades needed. So we have got a viable grid connection there, and it's been accepted.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any comments? We're really into the debate now. Comments before we try and come to a decision on this one, Councillor Duff?
Convener, I think Councillor Fotheringham was ahead of me actually, because he's number 1 in my list. So I'll let him go first.
Well, he's over on the side there. I'm probably not noticing him. Okay, Councillor Fotheringham.
Yes, thank you, Convener, and thank you, Councillor Duff, for pointing that out. Yes, I've listened very carefully today to all the objectors. I know the area very well. It's the area that I represent. We as councillors are in a very privileged position being in this virtual chamber, and we are here to represent the views of our constituents. Every single one of these objectors today, Convener, has spoken from the heart, in particular Kirsty and Sarah. And I think I've met Sarah before when we discussed some flooding issues several years ago. I'm not going to beat about the bush here, but I will support my constituents, and I am not supporting this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Moore, are you next? Councillor Moore, I'll just take you next.
Councillor Duff's ahead of me, Convener.
Well, I said I would take you first, so you just come along with it.
Okay. I'll do as I was told. Yes, I have, like Councillor Fotheringham, I've got grave concerns. I've heard a lot of the problems that the objectors have raised. The access. I can't see, in fact, I would say that it is in breach of TAPLAN Policy 7, and our own policies DS1, DS2, PV6, PV9, PV12 and PV20. So I will not be supporting it, and I will move that we refuse this.
Okay, my apologies, Councillor Duff, if I will hear from you now.
No, that's quite okay. No, I mean, we've heard all the objections, and I think Mr. Lindsay has told us it's a small proportion of the people that live in the area are objecting. I wanted to bring up one issue that there was a claim made by many objectors that we don't need any more renewable energy. They're saying there's all this offshore wind in it. In my ward, we've got offshore wind, and people objected to that and objected to developments at Ferryden at the port. We've got a scheme at Ballachy in my ward, which is probably half the size of this one on Councillor Braze has said much better agricultural land. I think Councillor Braze knows what he's talking about there because he used to farm there. We are going to need a huge amount more electrical energy generated in this country. You know, in early 2000s, only 20% of our energy was electrical. because we use a lot of oil and gas for transport, and we use a lot of gas for heating our houses. We're going to have to move to electrical energy, and we're going to have to generate a huge amount more electrical energy. So we're not in a steady state. We're going to need more schemes. We're going to need more wind. We're going to need more solar, and tidal if we can get it to work. So I think we've got to factor that in. And we have declared a climate emergency as a council. Officers have looked at the scheme very carefully. It's a huge report, a lot of work went into it, and they're recommending approval. So I would certainly be happy to take the views of the officers and approve this one.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Any other comments? No other comments. I was expecting more comments at this stage. Councillor Brace.
Convener, sorry, there's Councillor King and Councillor Brace.
Right, okay. In what order?
Councillor King first and then Councillor Brace.
Okay, Councillor King.
Put my camera back on. Yes, I think Councillor Duff has hit the nail on the head. There's going to be an enormous increase in demand for electricity into the future. We already know that petrol and diesel cars are to be stopped. They're going to be wound out of the system in about 5 or 6 years' time. 2030, I think, is the date. So there's going to be an immense need for more electricity to charge up electrical cars. We're recommending that houses no longer be heated using gas and oil, and they revert to electrical heating, either underfloor or specialist storage radiators, the new more efficient storage radiators. That's going to create an enormous demand for more electricity. There is suggestions that one of the more sustainable ways to maintain heavy transport vehicles is to fuel them with hydrogen. And one of the most important ways of obtaining hydrogen is through electrolysis, which is going to create an even bigger demand for electricity. All this in a time when we're decommissioning coal-fired, oil-fired and gas-fired electricity stations, generating stations. There is a strong objection from the bulk of the public to nuclear power. So nuclear power does not seem to be very much on the horizon in the future. All of this is pointing back to massive increases in sustainable, renewable energy from wind, tide and solar. We're just going to have to accept that if we're going to become a country which uses electricity on a much greater scale, and we're not going to use gas and oil to generate it, then we won't accept nuclear. The only other way is to get it from sustainable, renewable sources, wind, tide and solar. And we're going to have to accept that large areas of ground are going to disappear under solar wind installations. This is possibly the first one that's coming up in Angus of this scale. As the years progress, it won't be the last in the UK, it won't be the last in Scotland. And I think we've got to grasp this nettle firmly in our hands. We maybe don't like it. We maybe don't like the impact it has on some of the people in the area. But in general situation, if we're going to maintain the lifestyle that we expect, plugging in our laptops and our televisions and our kettles and our cookers into the electricity supply, it's got to come from somewhere. If it doesn't come from somewhere, we'll be back cooking over open fires in our gardens.
Okay, thank you, Councillor King. Councillor Brace.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Convener. I have listened very carefully to all the objectors, and I do feel for them. This would be a massive upheaval for them, and a change, and perhaps a reduction in their quality of life, and I accept that. We have before us a comprehensive report from our officers, and as Councillor King and Councillor Duff have said, there is a clear and pressing need to generate more electricity. And I'm sure that this particular site may not be the absolute ideal site, but it's the application that is in front of us today. And just reading it and listening to the presentation and to the objectors, I'm charged now with making a decision on this. I find it really quite difficult because everything in the papers does point to me concluding that this should be approved. However, we're not here as a rubber stamping body, just to agree with the officers. We have to take everything into consideration and come to a conclusion. Very difficult for me to make this decision, but I'm going to have to. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brace. Any other comments? No other comments. Well, it seems to be we've got to make a decision here. I have great difficulties with this one and great concerns, and I would just like to say, and Councillor King will agree with me, over 20 years been on development standards. This is the most difficult decision I have to make. This is my second term as being convener of development standards, and I was even woke up at 1:30 in the morning concerned about what my decision would be on this, because I was sort of on the borderline, but I've heard all the comments from the members of the committee, and I'm not going to go on too long. I am just going to move this report with difficulty and some slight concerns, but I'm moving this report for approval with the conditions attached. Is that agreed?
Convener, notification of an amendment.
Yes. Okay. Do I have a seconder for my motion for approval?
Councillor Duff, I think, convener.
Who was first, Sarah?
Councillor Duff.
Okay, Councillor Duff.
Yeah, I'm happy to second your motion, Councillor Lumgear. Like Councillor Brace, I think I would agree. I think this is a very difficult decision. It's not an easy one. We've heard some heartfelt pleas this morning, but we've got a bigger responsibility to the climate and to the rest of the population in the world to deal with the climate change emergency. And for that reason, I think that's a bigger responsibility, and I think that's the reason I would support you here on this decision.
Right, thank you, Councillor Duff. Do we have an amendment?
Yes, convener, I have an amendment.
Councillor Fotheringham, bring forward your amendment then.
Yes, thank you, convener. Convener, I'm not against alternative forms of power generation and the environmental benefits they bring compared to producing power with fossil fuels. However, this proposal, and we've heard from all the objectors, is in my view way out of character and far too large, approximately 300 acres, for a picturesque area of rural Angus. I've read the reports and the representations from the many concerned residents of the area and listened to the officer's presentation this morning and appreciate their opinion and advice. However, convener, I cannot support this application, as in my view it will have a very significant impact on visual amenity for the area and its residents and visitors. I also believe it will cause the area and its properties to become a less desirable place to live and visit. Therefore, convener, this application is, in my view, contrary to policy DS4, and I move that it is refused. Thank you.
Do you have a seconder, Councillor Fotheringham?
I don't know. I'm not sure, convener.
Councillor Surrick, I see your hand up, Councillor Surrick.
Yes, I'll second Councillor Fotheringham's amendment.
Thank you. Well, Sarah, do we go to the vote now?
Yes, convener, I'm happy to do that. If you just bear with me 1 second. The convener, so the motion by yourself, seconded Councillor Duff, is to approve the application as detailed in the report. The amendment by Councillor Fotheringham, seconded by Councillor Sturrock, is to refuse the application. as the proposal would have an unacceptable adverse impact on the surrounding area and the nearby properties, and is therefore contrary to policy DS4 of the local development plan. Please vote motion or amendment. Convener.
Motion.
Councillor Nicholl.
Amendment.
Is now
Councillor Bray.
exiting.
Councillor Brays.
Amendment.
All good.
Councillor Brown.
Motion.
Councillor Cheek. I think we may just have, Councillor Cheek may have left the meeting via the telephone. If it's okay, Convener, I'll come back to Councillor Cheek at the end. I think that was maybe just the notification that he had left. Okay, Councillor Duff.
Motion.
Councillor Durno.
Motion.
Councillor Fotheringham.
Amendment.
Councillor King. Councillor Laurie.
Amendment.
Councillor McLaren.
Amendment.
Councillor Moore.
Amendment.
Councillor Sturrock.
Amendment.
Councillor Cheap. Convener, Councillor Cheap doesn't appear to be in the meeting. As it stands, the amendment is carried by 7 votes to 5. The application is refused.
Okay, right, thank you. Therefore,
Convener, can I just, Mr. Thompson has his hand up. I think Mr. Thompson wants to come in.
Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Convener. I think for completeness, given that Councillor Cheap has participated in the entire item, as far as I can understand, that we should make an attempt to try and contact him to try and record his vote. And I appreciate that to a certain extent it's academic, but I do feel that we should attempt to record that.
Yes. Well, I feel it's such an important issue as this. I'm surprised that Councillor Cheap has left the meeting. However, we'll have to take David Thompson's advice and try and contact.
Convener.
Convener.
Yes.
I noticed that Councillor Cheap was missing about an hour ago.
Councillor Cheap came in on a telephone number, Councillor King.
Yes, but I noticed he was missing around about an hour ago. He disappeared off the screen.
I think
we should check with him. But I didn't see his telephone being anywhere for the past hour.
That's Councillor Cheap just come back into the meeting, Convener.
Okay.
The Cheap is now joining.
Councillor Cheap, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes. Councillor Cheap, can I just confirm at which point you left the meeting there?
Just when the voting was about to start, I got thrown out.
Okay, that's fine. Would you like me to clarify the motion and amendment, or are you happy just for me to record your vote?
No, you can record the vote because I heard both the motion and the amendment.
Okay, that's fine. Councillor Cheap, would you vote for the motion or the amendment?
No, I'm voting for the amendment.
Convener, the amendment is carried by 8 votes to 5. The application is refused.
Right. Therefore, planning application number 21/00535 Fool is hereby refused. Move on to our agenda. Anybody after this stage quite happy to carry on? Nobody needing a break?
Need my lunch.
Yeah, you need your lunch. So we'll just carry on to the application at Hillhead of Maniki for 8 houses there. I think Ed, Taylor, are you ready to come in now? Right,
Yeah.
carry on, Ed.
Thank you, convener. Can I just confirm members are seeing the slides there?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So item 8 is a full planning application for the erection of 8 houses and associated works on land surrounding 2 and 4 Hillhead Road, Maniki. This is an extract from the local development plan. It is the proposals map for Maniki Village. The black line on the outside of the settlement is the development boundary, and the application site in general terms is identified by the red polygon to the right hand side of the village. Now, it's important to note at this stage that the local development plan identifies the site as an existing housing site. The local development plan safeguards the site for residential purposes, and as such, the principle of residential development on the site is accepted. Members may also note and also may recall previously they have granted planning permission for development on the site. Previous applications on the site have proposed 5 large dwellings, but the application before members today proposes 8 dwellings, albeit the dwellings are smaller than those which were previously approved or proposed on the site. Okay, so the application site measures just under 5,000 square metres and is illustrated in the approximate position of the red polygon here. Just point out at this stage, another thing feature members may recall, there was a tree preservation order confirmed by the Development Standards Committee, I think in 2019, in early 2009, a row of lime trees which run along the east side of Panmure Road, which is the west side of the site, at position shown by the cursor. Now, it's understood that row of trees which are protected by tree preservation order, there's, I think, 12 lime trees in that location, and information submitted with the application suggests that the proposed development could coexist without adversely impacting on the trees, and similarly, the trees could coexist with the houses without adversely or unacceptably impacting on the amenity of the houses which are proposed within the site. There are other trees planted within the site which have established it is the old Maniki Railway station, so there is some evidence of land contamination in the site, and the tree survey information submitted suggests that it is acceptable to remove the remaining areas of self-set trees within the site from stable growing conditions. So the main access to the site would come in from Hillhead Road, which runs along in this area to the north of the site. There are 2 existing houses on the south side of Hillhead, which are both smaller than the house plots which are proposed within the site, but in assessing the acceptability of the number of houses proposed, regard has development in the surrounding area. In that respect, it is very mixed in character. You have Granary Terrace here to the south. Plot sizes in that area are around about 200 square metres per house. As I say, the houses to the north on Hillhead Road, adjacent to the would-be houses in this case, I think the one on the left here is around about 260 square metres, and the one on the right is closer to 400 square metres, although it may not appear that way from the way that. It's also worth noting that housing to the north of on the north side of Hillhead Road and in Affleck Gardens, plot sizes in that area are generally comparable to those proposed within the site, and also you'll notice the space standards between houses in that area very similar to those which I'll go to the next slide. Okay, so this is the proposed site layout. As I say, access will be taken from Hillhead Road, and that has been the source of representation submitted. So what would point members or direct members' attention to is each plot within the site has car parking for at least 3 cars. There would be 2 units proposed in the northwest corner. That's a semi-detached arrangement. 1 further down onto Hillhead Road. So 3 houses with a direct access onto Hillhead Road, and a new access formed serving the houses in the area to the rear. But each of the houses in this part of the site has parking for at least 3 cars. And in the case of these houses on the east side, all have integral garages. This is also worth pointing out at this stage. This is the position of the avenue of lime trees, which is subject to the tree preservation order. It would be a reasonable distance from the protected trees, and the information submitted suggests that they could coexist with the protected trees, subject to the provision of safety fencing being erected around the root protection zone, which is shown by the position of the purple line as illustrated by the cursor. So I'll just show members the details of the proposed designs. These are the two houses which are proposed in the northwest corner, a pair of semi-detached units. Moving on to the other 6 plots within the site, they're very similar in style, 1.5 stories with dormer windows. These houses on plots 3, 4, 6, 7, 5 and 8 all have integral garages. But the style of houses that are proposed in the application are quite similar to those found on the Fiddler's site, which is probably slightly out with the shot here, slightly down, but on its west side. But as I say, the house styles in the application are very similar to those found on the Fiddler's site. So this is an oblique image from the site, which is taken from the sales particulars. So that explains the annotations, which are slightly in the way, I'm afraid. But what this is useful at showing is it shows the position of the lime trees, which are protected by a tree preservation order along the west side of the site, which are shown in the approximate position of the cursor. As I say, those trees could coexist with development in the site. There are a number of other self-set trees within the site. Their loss is considered to be acceptable. It's justified by the tree survey information submitted. When we served, the tree was discounted, and it's also worthy of note that previous planning permissions granted on the site have anticipated the loss of those other trees. So we identify that we can save the trees which are having regard to previous permissions on the site and the tree survey. It's considered acceptable to allow the self-set trees which are primarily contained along Kirkton Road. While they do provide an attractive frontage along Kirkton Road, given the content of the tree survey information, the planning history of the site, and subject to a planning condition to require new planting, it's considered that that loss is justified and is acceptable. So this also just illustrates the different densities at Affleck Gardens and Hillhead Road on the right-hand side. Reasonably low density, probably similar to what we see in the application, and then higher density. So I've got 3 photographs of the site to show members. One of the main sources of representation relates to concerns about the use of Hillhead Road for traffic associated. So this slide is just intended to give you an impression of the width of Hillhead Road, which you can see the parking the vehicle here. There is space for it to pass this side of Hillhead Road, and I think one of the proposed planning conditions requires the footway on be formed. It is a route that is used by pedestrians through the village to get towards Maniki Country Park. In this area, there's a connection across Kirkton Road, and it's considered in terms of road traffic and pedestrian safety, having regard to the comments of the road service, having regard to the existing widths of the road, and having regard to the adequate level of parking proposed within each plot, that road traffic and pedestrian safety issues aren't significant and subject to the conditions requiring improvements to visibility displays at the junction. On the right-hand side of the photograph here, there would be 2 of the semi-detached units formed in the northwest corner of the site. They're similar in style and form to the houses that exist on the south side of Hillhead Road. This is taken slightly further back, slightly further to the west. It gives an impression of the site relative to Hillhead Road on the left-hand side of the photograph and Panmure Road on the right-hand side. The TPO truly well in this photograph because obviously it's the wrong time of year to show the canopy in bloom. But those trees would be safeguarded and could coexist with the development. There'll be a new footway formed to turn this corner, and the applicant has proposed boundary treatments on Hillhead Road and on the corner here, and plugging the gaps on Panmure Road and Kirkton Road, which would ensure that it fits in with the character pattern of development. As you can see on the left here, low blockwork boundary walls are carried. The applicant proposes to replicate that pattern in their development. This photograph is taken from the sort of southwest corner out with the site. So you've got Panmure Road on the old railway bridge. The application site is where these trees are located, and on the south side of the site, on the right-hand side of the photograph. The site extends to the approximate position of this red sign. I hope you can see that. So the trees which are in this area would require to be removed. As I say, that has been justified by tree survey information, and the avenue of lime trees would be retained. They're the trees which are considered to be of greatest importance within the site. So bringing matters together, the application has attracted 5 objections relating mainly to amenity, road safety and impact on trees. And the report deals with amenity. The space standards between properties are consistent with those found elsewhere within the wider area, and are broadly consistent with council guidance. I touched upon road safety earlier in the presentation. Hillhead Road is a road which has sufficient space for two-way traffic. It has footways on either side, and having regard to the availability of parking within the site, it's considered that it could accommodate the level of traffic proposed. In terms of impacts on trees, I've talked at some length dealing with that issue. So planning conditions are proposed to deal with matters raised in representation and to ensure mitigation to offset adverse impacts. As I say, the site is safeguarded within the local development plan for residential use. It is an existing housing site in the local development plan and has previously been benefited from planning permission. It's considered that the layout is acceptable, is compatible with the character and pattern of development in the area, and on that basis is recommended for approval.
Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Commissioner Taylor, for your presentation. I presume that at the moment the whole site is in the ownership of one person or organisation.
That's certainly confirmed by the land ownership certificate, yes.
Right, so they look after the avenue of lime trees. When they've sold the site off to these 8 properties, who's going to have responsibility for these trees which have a TPO on them?
So there's conditions attached relating to landscaping within the site, and we would have regard to that when we discharge those planning conditions in discussion with the applicant.
So the purchasers of the properties would have to be made aware that those trees are their responsibility and they would have to look after them.
That's correct.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions to Mr. Taylor? No other questions. Speakers, we have you and Stuart, the applicant. If anybody has any questions, Mr. Stuart is here for answering any questions. Mr. Stuart, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, any questions to Mr. Stuart? No. No questions to Mr. Stewart then. Any comments? No comments. I feel this is a straightforward application, and I will be moving the application for approval with conditions attached. Is that agreed? Councillor King. You're muted, Councillor King.
I was just going to come in to second you, convener, and just to confirm, this is a site that has been in the local plan for many years. It's had planning permission before. While it's increased the number of houses, it's not a greater density because there were much bigger houses. Access from Hillhead Road, yes, but I noticed from the slides that Hillhead Road is marked as no through road. So there's not going to be traffic running up and down it. It's just going to be the houses that are coming onto it. I see absolutely no reason why this should have been passed by the officers under delegated powers, other than if there was more than 5 objections, and that's the only reason it's here before us.
Thank you for that, Councillor King. Therefore, this application is approved. Application number 21/00254 full is hereby approved. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Move on to agenda number 9. This is just a planning appeal decision at Land and Ground Bank. Arbroath Road is for noting. Is that noted?
Agreed.
Okay, right, thank you. Well, that concludes our meeting for today, and I would just like to take this opportunity to thank everybody for all their inputs into this one of our very difficult planning applications. As I said, it's probably the most difficult one I've had in my 20 years as convener, and just like to thank all of you today and all our staff for helping us and keeping me right as well. So thank you.
Aye.
Thanks, convener.
Right.
Aye.